Good afternoon and welcome to the next event in the virtual building tour series organised by the Leeds Society of Architects and RIBA Yorkshire. Today we'll be taking a look around the new Maggie's Centre in Leeds, designed by Heatherwick Studio. We are joined by an audience of nearly 300, which is absolutely fantastic. So thanks to all of you for supporting the LSA, the RIBA and Maggie's. Please be advised this event is being recorded and will be made available on the RIBA's YouTube channel in a few days' time. I'm Ben Pipkin, co-president of the LSA. Let me introduce you to our two presenters today. Amanda Proctor is centre manager at Maggie's Leeds, working with a small, professionally trained team to provide support to anyone affected by cancer at any stage of a cancer experience. Amanda joins us today live from the kitchen table at the Maggie's Centre. I'm told this is the best place to get Wi-Fi signal in the building. Hello, Amanda.
Hi there.
Hiya.
Great to be with you.
Thanks. Matt Cash is partner and group leader at Heatherwick Studio, having joined in 2006. Matt has worked on and overseen some of the studio's most important projects, including a reinvented grain silo in Cape Town, a new public park on the Hudson River in New York, and a kinetic glass house in West Sussex. Not a bad set of projects, really. And of course, Maggie's Leeds. Hello, Matt.
Hi, Ben. Hi. Good to speak to everyone today.
Before we kick off, I'd just like to say a couple of short but very important thank yous. Thanks to Ibstock for supporting us as event sponsor, and to accompany that, I will be sharing the following. There we are. Excellent. So thanks to Ibstock for supporting us as event sponsor. Alongside support from the RIBA's Local Initiative Fund, this has allowed us to deliver today's event free of charge to RIBA members and to pass on any income from paid tickets to the Maggie's charity. Ibstock is a name many of you will be familiar with, but please feel free to check out the full range of products on offer using the links in the chat bar. Thanks also to Cloud9 Photography for carrying out the 3D scan of the building, and of course to Maggie's for giving us access in the first place. As well as 3D scanning, Cloud9 provide drone footage and time-lapse videos, as well as architectural photography. Okay, that's enough from me, and I'm pleased to be able to hand over to Amanda to tell us a bit more from the client's perspective.
Thanks again for having me with you tonight. It's a real pleasure to be able to share our beautiful workspace. So just to let you know what we do here at Maggie's, we're here for anyone with cancer, their family and their friends and colleagues. And Maggie's vision was to provide, to have a space where people can breathe, where it's not the hospital space, and to really not lose the joy of living in the fear of dying. And we offer cancer support without an appointment, and people can just come in. We are the only centre in Yorkshire at the moment, so we're just raising our profile across the region. Our ambition is to have a Maggie's in every cancer centre across the 60 cancer centres across the UK, and you can see we're ever growing. We originated in Scotland, so there's a cluster across Scotland and then down in London, and then you can see us in the middle there, first one in Yorkshire. So we knew that there was a need for Maggie's in Yorkshire. Every year more than 14,000 people are diagnosed with cancer in Yorkshire, and just in Leeds they see around 9,500 new diagnoses a year, with more than 150,000 people living with or after cancer treatment across the region. We know that the NHS provides excellent clinical care, but their time is limited and they focus very much on the medical side of things. So we can think about, what does this mean? What does the cancer mean? How am I going to tell my friends, my family, my children? Am I going to die? Will I be able to pay the bills? And how will I get back to normal now that I've finished treatment? And these challenges not only affect the person with cancer, but their friends and their family too. So I'll just introduce you to our team. We're a small team of paid experts. You can see me in the middle there. I'm centre head. I'm also a nurse by background, and I work operationally in the centre as a cancer support specialist. We have Emma, who's our clinical psychologist, Aisha, our benefits advisor. You can see Helen there, who's also a nurse and our cancer support specialist, and then Laura and Amy, our centre fundraisers. And then we employ sessional staff to help us out with our programme of support. And also we have volunteers in the centre to help with the running of things. So what we do at Maggie's is unique. We're for anyone affected by cancer at any stage of their cancer experience. There's no time limit, and we know that things can be triggered at different points, such as scans, bereavement, lots of trigger points throughout their cancer journey. We're for any type of cancer. We tailor that support to an individual's need. As we've talked about, our centre staff are professionally trained. We're always near to a cancer centre, near to the hospital. Hopefully a warm and welcome environment, which you'll see in a few moments. Our support is free of charge and no referral is needed from the hospital, and we do collaborate with the NHS and other support charities. So what did we need from the space here at Maggie's? We have very difficult conversations here, and we needed a space to encourage this open discussion about living with the effects of cancer, the emotional consequences of cancer, thinking about self-confidence, living with uncertainty, conversations around sexuality and fertility, relationships, returning to work, and living with and beyond cancer. We needed a place that would encourage that open discussion, but also have private areas where we could have conversations in a safe place for people to talk about that anytime. We needed a flexible space, so that at some points that space might be for a group or for a sitting area. And we also wanted to support the flat hierarchy that we have here at Maggie's. So no reception desk, no uniforms, no staff room, no office, a place for people where they feel they can just come in. And I'm just going to pause there for hopefully Matt to show you around.
Great, thank you very much, Amanda. We're just going to transition now over to Matt, who's going to talk us through the process of designing such a unique building and making it a reality. While Matt's just loading up his presentation, let me give you a bit more background on Heatherwick Studio. I'm sure many of you will have heard of them anyway. Founded by Thomas Heatherwick, the studio has designed buildings, spaces and objects across the world, including the 2012 Olympic Cauldron, the new London Routemaster bus and the regeneration of Coal Drops Yard in King's Cross. The Heatherwick team now includes over 200 people based in a combined workshop and studio in central London. And that's just about the right amount of filler from me. So I think we're ready to go, and it's over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Ben, and it's great to speak to everyone this evening. And thank you, Amanda, for the kind of introduction to the kind of brief for the project. As Ben said, I'm a kind of an architect and partner at Heatherwick Studio, and we're a design studio based in London, and we work on projects all over the world. And those projects are principally delivered by our team in kind of our London-based headquarters in King's Cross, which has a workshop at the very heart, which kind of informs how we approach our design project, which is from the spirit of kind of making and craft. So as I said, we work on all sorts of different projects, from kind of furniture to kind of pavilions to educational buildings, and all sorts of different scales, all the way from a kind of a perfume bottle up to kind of an airport. But as a studio, we're most interested in the kind of design challenge, and we're interested in the kind of in the human scale and how you interact and kind of touch buildings. So we're very interested in materiality. We're very interested in how you feel emotionally when you engage with the built environment and with buildings in particular. So today I'm going to talk about a really special project to us at the studio, which is our Maggie's Yorkshire project. And Maggie's is an incredible organisation that Amanda's perhaps introduced some of you to today. And Yorkshire was in desperate need of a Maggie Centre. This is St James's kind of hospital, which is one of the largest teaching hospitals in Europe. And you can see this is in effect a city in and of itself. And it has a huge kind of cancer ward, oncology ward on site. But there was a desperate need to have an actual Maggie Centre here. And as you can see through this, it's mostly large kind of buildings and kind of car park. And the kind of the leftover space, the last space on the entire site was actually the last piece of green space within this kind of sea of concrete. So that was the site for the new Maggie Centre. And it's actually an extremely kind of challenging site. It's a very steep slope, It's adjoined by a not very beautiful kind of multi-story car park, and it's also adjoined by two kind of main access routes, which are kind of a blue route, which is the emergency access route into the hospital. So quite a challenging site, leftover site. But it did offer lots of interesting design possibilities. It had amazing views back out of the hospital, one of the few points where you can actually get relief from the kind of the concrete kind of megalopolis of Jimmy's. And that gave us a lot of kind of design kind of inspiration for how we would approach this project. So as I said, it was the site was on a kind of very busy environment, flanking kind of an A&E route and next to a multi-story car park. And it was one of the last green spaces. So as a studio, we were very interested in somehow retaining as much of that green space as possible, meanwhile providing quite a large centre, kind of nearly 500 square metre centre right in the middle of the hospital. So firstly, as a Maggie centre, you require kind of privacy. So it has a number of kind of counselling rooms, so people can have those difficult conversations in kind of private. And this could be only moments after getting a diagnosis at the oncology ward, which is very close to here. Secondly, all centres kind of need a heart, a gathering space to bring anyone that uses the centre together. Typically, that's at the kind of the kitchen or the kind of the heart of the home. And that was really important for us to think about how we might kind of create a heart to the project. And then there are other more functional requirements of a library, something that is called a kind of a pause space, which I'll talk about a bit later, but also kind of an exercise room and quiet areas as well. And we wanted to kind of enclose that and protect it from kind of the busy roads that surround it, and bring some of that garden back in to reinstate the garden space that we were taking away by putting the building there. And also lastly, to take advantage of those amazing views over Yorkshire, so you can kind of in a way kind of spiritually leave the hospital and view out over Yorkshire, rather than always being reminded of where you are and the situation that you were facing. We very much wanted the entrance to the Maggie Centre to be a journey. So as I talked about in terms of the views out, also it's important that the journey to the centre was giving you a moment of transition from the clinical environment into something kind of more like a home, more nurturing. And so the entrances are actually deliberately as far away from the pathways we could make it. So you could give some moment of pause between leaving the hospital and entering into Maggie's. And Maggie's have an absolutely fantastic brief, which is really quite simple. As a provocation, a home people would not have dared build for themselves. And so in effect, they wanted to create a kind of a home for those patients to kind of come together in. And, you know, the project was reasonably large, as I said. So one of the big challenges was how do you create a large project that is also a home? As a studio, we experiment with lots of different kind of formal languages and material and use kind of sketching quite prolifically as we develop up our projects. So these are just some of the earlier sketches that we had about the project, where we had the idea of utilising kind of the multi-level of the site to create a series of different spaces, but also to be able to access out to nature. We do a lot of model making and prototyping in the studio. I'm just showing some of the kind of iterative process that we go into. Also, we're very keen on kind of one-to-one mock-ups and prototypes that we also have in our workshop in London. Also, we have some yards and outside space that we also utilise. So first, it was really about how do you create a home, kind of a homely. We wanted to use kind of warm, tactile, kind of crafted materials. It has to be low maintenance. Maggie's is a charity, so the on-cost on the building must be kind of reduced as much as possible. But also about kind of healthy and sustainable kind of environment for the people that visit and use the centre. We were drawn to the idea of using kind of timber as a kind of warm and kind of natural material, but also the kind of lime plaster, so the actual building would feel as much unlike a clinical environment as possible. We're inspired by some of this imagery of kind of houses which really connect with their natural setting, and we thought it'd be wonderful. So somehow amongst this kind of very much concrete, kind of large kind of teaching hospital, that we gave a kind of an oasis, an escape from that, and to bring you back into nature. So starting with those counselling rooms that I spoke before, we imagine those counselling rooms almost kind of reaching out a protective canopy around themselves to then hold new kind of platforms of landscape garden that would then cascade over the centre. So when you're viewing the centre for any of the surrounding buildings, you'd be viewing very much onto nature rather than just as another building. And then when you're in the centre, you feel kind of enveloped and surrounded by kind of greenery to enable you kind of psychologically to escape from the clinical environment of the hospital. These are some of the kind of early renderings that we created of the project. You can see the 3 counselling rooms beginning to kind of lean out and cantilever out to hold the gardens, and also to create protective spaces underneath themselves, and to start to blur the inside and outside together as much as possible to prevent barriers to kind of entry. You can see here on these images the multi-level nature of the site, and try to use that as a benefit to the centre to make it feel much smaller than it actually is. And then it's a multi-level building, so you can actually connect between up from the main entrance into the kitchen and up to some of the counselling rooms on the upper levels. Okay, so before I go and talk about some of the images of the kind of the finished building, I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about some of the technical challenges of the project, and how we try to use kind of sort of hopefully some interesting design thinking to overcome them. One of the first kind of main issues with the site, as soon as we started walking around, was really understanding how steep the site is sloping. So there's a 6-metre gradient from the north to the south end of the site, and try to use that to, in a way, step the building down. So rather than creating a big slab at a particular level, to actually use the stepping site to our advantage, to create a series of smaller rooms connected by kind of lifts and stair access. And just a picture of the kind of the groundworks. The groundworks was one of the most challenging kind of aspects to the site, because the site itself had a petrol interceptor from the multi-storey car park next door. There was a lot of spoil in the site that was from the construction of the car park that was adjoining it. Lots of challenges with getting out of the ground on the project. But this is where we also started to really bring the landscape through. So those multiple level changes we could really start to absorb with a kind of an undulating hillside landscape. We're also very conscious about how we might minimise disruption to the hospital, because the site was also on an emergency access route, so we didn't have much lay down space or construction space on the site, but also to create an elevated platform for the garden and be lightweight and cost effective. So we're very interested in kind of prefabricating the building as much as possible, using kind of CLT and LVL as 2 different kind of timber technologies to kind of prefabricate the main components of the building, including the structure. And at the tendering process, we went out to lots of different companies in the UK and throughout Europe for the contract to kind of deliver that. And we had a kind of really good conversation and series of interviews with a company called Bloom & Lehman, who delivered the project. And Bloom & Lehman, as a timber fabricator, they own their own forestry, so they both kind of manage the forests and their own factory, and they then produce the various kind of cassettes for the project, but also reuse any of the waste of that process to kind of, in a way, fuel their factory. So we were quite interested in that as a building process, and using that particularly on this project. So just going through some of the timber elements once the kind of the groundworks have been completed. So there are CLT, 3 kind of CLT kind of counselling rooms, which are these kind of pods, which you can see here. And then we had these kind of columns, which help support the cantilever of the gardens, which are in kind of LVL, which is, I won't go into too much detail about the technical aspects of LVL in comparison to CLT, but they are slightly different in terms of the fabrication kind of processes. LVL much better for kind of structural strength and rigidity. And here's some of those LVL kind of columns, which are kind of in beech, and which also enable us to kind of integrate services within them. That's the beauty of using kind of prefabricated kind of timber material. You can integrate services really nicely. And here's some of those kind of beams at the edge that help support the gardens above. And then the principle of kind of the fins that help support the gardens. These are kind of glue lamps in a radial pattern around the edge of the pot. We were very interested in creating kind of in a way kind of smooth kind of curved form, which is quite an antithesis of a traditional hard and rectilinear kind of clinical environment. But that form, it was quite expensive to form if you were doing a complex geometry, it'd be quite expensive. But using the fins as the structural element, they suggest a smooth form without having to everything be 3D curved. So they were quite a useful kind of design mechanism to do that. It's quite a complex kind of geometry that we developed up in the studio using kind of Rhino and kind of Grasshopper scripting. which then we've worked quite a lot on interoperability into our kind of BIM model. So be able to kind of produce a kind of a highly complex kind of BIM model for the tender, which would then immediately be sent to Bloom & Lehman to then put into their machines for the actual fabrication. And so you can see some of the kind of main fabrication elements of the project, the fins here from the factory. And then there's these huge kind of routing machines that then take that to then form each part of the building. So principally around about kind of 85% of the building was prefabricated and then kind of installed on site. So you can see here, these are the fins that then get kind of slotted together and placed on site. And they then are abutting the main kind of counselling rooms to create the overall geometry. And the gaps between the fins were then kind of plastered with a lime plaster, which kind of breathes and is very good for kind of air purity and quality. So we really like the kind of the warmth that it gave and the kind of more homely feel that it gave us against any other kind of form of kind of internal kind of plaster or finish. And that plaster could also then be used on the outside of the building. So importantly, there is no discernible difference in the materiality between inside and outside, which we felt really brought the landscape into it and prevented the building in a way having any barrier to entry, because one of the key drivers behind Maggie's as a charity was to really become something that would draw you into it and not be intimidating. The roof, very simple kind of cassettes that were then prefabricated and craned in on site. So each of these panels just kind of slot together, and the installation process was extremely fast. All of the superstructure and the counselling rooms and all the timber work was done in just a couple of months, which was really important in terms of being able to get deliveries onto the site and to not interrupt the emergency route into the main oncology ward. So here's some of the kind of imagery of that building kind of coming together. You can see those kind of fins coming up that kind of clad the counselling rooms and then support the landscape on the kind of upper level. And then the way in which the fins kind of lean out, you can see here on the imagery, we try to use them as much as possible as kind of structural elements on things like the staircase. So the staircase seems to come out of the main structure. So in effect, the building really kind of disappears other than these three main rooms. The rest is kind of very light touch. And one thing that we were really hoping for, which we were fortunate in, was the kind of the warmth that the kind of the timber and the kind of lime plaster gives to the to give it a kind of a sense of tactility and warmth, which we thought was really important. Again, moving away from more traditional clinical environment. We also worked with kind of very skillful kind of joinery companies, which actually managed to create quite a high level of finish to things like the kind of kitchen cabinetry, but also where we needed to have retaining walls to hold back the soil because of the sloping site, we just kind of sandblasted the concrete. So rather than creating an additional finish or layers to the building, we wanted to bring an honesty of how the building had been put together and utilize that. And the fact that the building sunken down into the ground also was very good for kind of thermal mass. So it performs thermally extremely well. As Amanda will maybe talk about kind of later on, that the kind of the kitchen table is kind of classically the heart of each kind of centre. It's where, you know, the heart of any kind of home. It's where people come together and congregate and have those kind of conversations when they first kind of enter, make a cup of tea and sit down. So we were very conscious that the kitchen table needed to kind of reflect a kind of spirit of gathering and wanted to use some of the design languages we'd used elsewhere on the building here. So this was the kind of the prototype for the kitchen table, which actually, rather than using kind of timber cassettes, actually used cork as the kind of the main material, and that was very deliberate. Again, when you enter into kind of a centre or into a more clinical environment, the kind of the noise, the acoustics of that, the banging of doors, and with the self closers, the kind of the sound of footsteps on top of kind of hard polished surfaces, we wanted to kind of go against that. And so the cork, even when you put your coffee cup down on the table, has got a very soft sound. So actually using as much kind of soft natural materials, so you can actually lower the reverberation in the room and mean you can have those private, difficult conversations without worrying about it bouncing around and being picked up elsewhere. So a lot of kind of little moves like that to, in a way, give the impression of this kind of sanctuary and the sense of a home. So this is the project kind of on site during the kind of construction process, and actually starting to plant out the roofscape Interesting, we had lots of conversations about would it be a kind of sedum roof or could it be something with actually worms. Worms were a big conversation, but we were kind of adamant that the roof itself needed to contain worms. It had to be kind of real soil with real trees on it, and so the landscape between the landscape that's not on top of the building and then on top of the building is very similar. So trying to create a kind of duality between those, which we felt was very important to kind of nestle the project properly in its landscape. And actually, one thing that was very surprising in just kind of the first spring of the opening of the centre, the verdant greenery that we managed to get was really exciting. And we really the building very early on started to bed itself into its landscape, which was thrilling. I'm showing some of the kind of external shots of the building, and I'll use the model a bit later on to go through the kind of as you experience it from a user. But it was very exciting because these are very early on in the development of the landscaping that it quickly felt embedded in its context. I spoke a little bit before about creating moments of kind of leaving the clinical environment and frankly the quite concrete and kind of road dominated environment of the rest of the hospital. And so each entrance into the building is actually down a path to lead you in a transition. So here is actually the back entrance to the project, which leads you direct into the kitchen. So much like you would do in a home, there's a main door that leads to kind of the main entrance, but also there's a back entrance into the centre through this kind of pathway down, which leads you straight to the kitchen. And at night, the building kind of begins to kind of glow within the landscape. Okay, so I'll briefly just hand back to Ben as I load up the model so we can start taking a journey through the actual building itself.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Matt. A huge amount of information there you managed to get through in quite a short space of time, so thank you. Yeah, I can't remember the last project where yeah, worms was sort of top of the agenda really. So yeah, really interesting stuff, and amazing to sort of see that kind of concept stage being followed through to the real building. So we will be having a chance now to have a look inside the building thanks to our Matterport model. While Matt's getting that loaded up, I'll just briefly explain how the 3D scanning process works. So the team at Cloud9 went to the site a couple of weeks ago and they took a series of 360-degree photos as well as infrared data, and that was sort of every kind of 2 or 3 meters throughout the building, and then all that information then gets combined to create a really detailed digital model, and you can walk around it, you can look at plans, you can even take measurements from it. We've also included some photography from outside the building to show you some of the garden spaces, albeit it's a cold winter's day in Yorkshire. But as Matt was saying there, you know, the landscape's a huge part of the building and your experience of it. So hopefully we're ready to go on the model, and I will hand back over to Matt.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, so hopefully you can see the model here, and if you have an opportunity to kind of move around it, it's really quite an interesting way of viewing the building without going to see it. So you can see here that the building is actually on a great many levels, almost kind of 5 levels, as it steps down through the kind of steeply sloping site. And what I'll do is I'll just take us around as a first-time visitor would experience the kind of the centre, because the idea of the building is that as you know, you might have just literally 5 or 10 minutes before just had some pretty devastating kind of news on the oncology ward, which is very close to the centre, and then you might be going to your car about to drive home, and someone might have suggested that you might want to pop into the kind of Maggie centre. So that's the kind of scenario that we think about when we think about how you might enter the building and how we might kind of encourage you to go in. So I'll just kind of take you through. This is the kind of, as Ben said, this is kind of a winter's day in Leeds, but this is the kind of the main entrance kind of into the building, which has a number of kind of seating kind of moments. So in fact, you could just enter to this level and sit down on a seat and just wait there and just kind of spend a moment around. So it's important that the centre in effect allows you to penetrate it to different levels as you build confidence in entering it, and it isn't that kind of in-out. We're trying to avoid that kind of that definitive in-out moment by allowing you to kind of be drawn through. So if I go in, so this is the kind of the main entrance area here. I'll just kind of spin around slightly to the right so you can see where we've come from. So we've just gone through the main path off from the kind of main entrance from from the rest of the hospital. And there is something here on the right hand side which is kind of a pause space, and this is something that's really important to the centre. It's where you actually come in and you can come in straight away and just take a seat. So there isn't, you know, people won't, their heads won't spin around to see who's entering. It's like, it's a moment where you can actually just come in and sit down and feel like you know you're okay to be here, and you can spend 5 or 10 minutes just waiting there, and someone may come over to see whether you're okay, or may leave you there to kind of just spend a few moments. But it's important that it felt like kind of a nook, kind of sheltered kind of nook. So the ceiling here is quite low, and the furniture is there just to kind of draw you through. You can see as I spin around kind of into the main kind of entrance area here, the building kind of slowly reveals itself. So you have kind of a series of different levels, but it doesn't reveal itself all at once. So hopefully we hope to users that it doesn't feel kind of intimidating to kind of enter into an experience. And you can see where these fins come through and the lime plaster on the walls here. And what we've tried to do is also use the fins to create moments for lots of shelving. So it's important that, much like any kind of home, you know, you get kind of a collection of knickknacks, a collection of personal things that build up over time. And we really wanted to give the centre the ability to do that. So you know, lots of kind of shelving and moments where kind of things are then collected and placed, which gives it a sense of kind of personal, again, as against the kind of more clinical environment that you might be more used to kind of seeing. And also what we wanted to try and do is avoid anything kind of stuck onto the building. So even in terms of the donor wall, if you like, or the kind of the thanking of people that have contributed to the building, that's actually routed out of the fins themselves rather than being like a plaque that you place on it. So it's just to give it a kind of sense of texture and kind of detail and solidity to the whole building, rather than have anything that's kind of just kind of stuck on. And if I kind of spin to the left a little bit, this is where the main reception and library is kind of located. Here, this is where the kind of the receptionists kind of sit. And you can see those shelving units, they cover the entire building. So there's lots of opportunity for placing of kind of books and ornamentation. And then you can see those kind of beams that I spoke about too, and how they kind of interact with those shelving units. So because of the steeply sloping site and the complexity of the building, the detailing is really important in terms of kind of looking at every single moment of kind of connection. And luckily the use of kind of the BIM model and the prefabrication process meant that we spent a long time before we even kind of cut anything and working on through all those kind of details. And you can see the retaining walls here, which have been sandblasted to reveal the aggregate, and the aggregate was tested quite substantially in terms of getting some warmth to both cement and the stone that's used in those aggregates. So it complemented the timber work and the tonal work of kind of the timber. And then you can see, maybe I'll move through into one of the kind of the counselling rooms, just spinning around here. So there are a number of counselling rooms which are all kind of slightly different from each other, which is where you might be having a kind of private conversation or a kind of discussion with one or more people. And you can see the walls are kind of curved on the inside, so you're creating kind of these soft reveals around the kind of the windows and the plaster work and the kind of and the window boards and so on and so forth. And then it has these little kind of desks. And then the idea that this furniture is quite light and easy to move around, so it can be configured in lots of different ways as required by the centre. So going back out again, you can see here the flooring is a kind of a micro cement, which is just 2 or 3 millimeters thick. It was there to kind of give evoke a sense of kind of natural finish. Almost kind of like earth, that you're stepping from one garden to a kind of to another. So the kind of the warmth of that was really important, and the kind of natural kind of patination of that was kind of really important. It's quite an economical way of creating such a kind of seamless and that kind of natural finish. And then as we move through, you can see the shelving units continue kind of up the main staircase, and directly ahead of you is the kind of the kitchen. So your eye is hopefully drawn kind of in and up, and encouraging you to either kind of ascend up the stairs to the kitchen, or down to kind of the snug or the main kind of exercise area. So I'll take you down first through here, down into kind of one of the most flexible spaces in the centre. Okay, so asking a lot of my internet connection. But here down into kind of the lower floor, you can see this is a very flexible space, very kind of high ceiling. So the idea being is it could be used like it is, you can see here with furniture. It's a series of kind of talks or kind of education, but also these seats can all be moved to one side, where you could then have kind of exercise classes or yoga or any other kind of activity that might want to kind of go on there. And again, the retaining wall you can see at the bottom here, and then the beams that pick up the fins of each of the three kind of main centres that kind of come together. And then you can see here again the line wash on the walls. And one of the things we're most kind of pleased about was the aggregate of the concrete. As I said, it's not been clad. It's the in situ cast concrete, using kind of retarders to kind of wash off the fines on that. But it actually came out kind of very kind of warm and tactile, which we felt was really important for the kind of overall feel of the project. So just taking you back up to the main ground floor level. Each level is accessible by a kind of lift that stops at kind of every floor, which means you can access every area as necessary. Okay, so this is the kind of the main centre of the project, where the three main counselling rooms kind of meet and overlap each other. And you can see here how there's the lift towards the back. You can see there. You can see the kind of main central kind of table, which is in the same radial configuration as the pots, and it uses cork on top. And then the furniture, which is deliberately kind of eclectic, so it doesn't feel like you've just gone in and bought 20 chairs and placed them. It's actually a series of kind of individual chairs which have their own personality, again to kind of evoke a sense of kind of home, and the fact that it's like you're in somebody's kind of home, and it's okay to place something, a coffee cup down on the side or on a piece of shelving. You might bring a book here and leave it here and then pick it up kind of later on. So it feels like it's a kind of living kind of home, and then toys and things on low shelves for children and so on and so forth. And then in terms of the kind of the staircase, which was really important because, you know, it is a multi-level building and because of the nature of the site. So it's important that the staircase really started to draw you up and you're encouraged to kind of use it rather than just transition between levels. It's okay to kind of pause here. You can see here on the balustrade, it's kind of it's quite wide. I mean, it's slightly angled in towards you, and that's kind of deliberate. So it's actually kind of a perch. So the idea that you could lean on the staircase and put your elbows on that balustrade and have a conversation with someone sitting down on the table or up on the kind of mezzanine level to encourage kind of interaction rather than just transition. So the staircase is more as an extension of the main spaces rather than just as a means to move between them. And then that leads you up into the kind of in a way the heart of the centre really, which is the kitchen. You can see straight ahead the kind of the back entrance into the kitchen, which you can access directly for the oncology wing, with the idea being that if you were a first-time user, you might use the main entrance, but over time you'd spend a lot of time in the kitchen. You'd recognise that kind of back entrance, and so you could just come straight down into a much more informal kind of way of entering the building. And then here's another one of the tables with the cork and the kind of the eclectic mix of chairs, and then into the kitchen itself, again using kind of timber as the kind of the main kind of material, and kept very kind of simple and open with the abilities to view out to the landscape around you. So it's important wherever you were in the centre, in effect you were kind of surrounded by nature, either through the gardens on the outside or through the kind of the planting, the extensive planting kind of inside the building. Okay, taking through here. Okay, So you can see here how the three different counselling room roofs begin to kind of interrelate with each other. And you can see some of the detailing of how the glazing line steps down between the two, and how the kind of bullnose finishes to those edge just kind of finishes off that the kind of the thin edge and interfaces between the support of the underside with the main fins and the kind of the roof landscape on top. And just taking it up the stairs. This then leads us up to the mezzanine, where it was kind of envisaged, and I don't know whether Amanda spends a lot of her time there, that the centre head would kind of sit here, because in this kind of position you get the ability to view over the whole of the kind of the centre. So you can view down into the kind of kitchen, you can view into the kind of the entrance area, into the kind of the library, down onto the kind of main table. So that kind of view means that even if there aren't many people working in the centre at one time, you can have complete kind of visibility of what's going on, which is quite important from a kind of a staffing perspective as well, as we kind of developed up the brief with kind of Maggie's. And you can see here, you get a kind of good look at the fins and some of the kind of the detailing of the kind of connections between the fins, which were in kind of two parts and then kind of bolted together. And then in a way, because of the kind of fabrication process, there was the ability to create this kind of sawtooth kind of soft connection between the two rather than kind of a straight line. So just trying to add little bits of detail into the kind of interfaces if at all possible. And kind of the, everyone's architects' all favourite details like kind of fire escapes and things like that you have to kind of accommodate. Just placing it upon a shelf rather than kind of sticking it kind of into the ceiling, little things like that. And if I go over to this, also kind of one of the other kind of great uses of being able to use kind of timber and prefabricated timber is all the integration of services that you can actually use the timber to actually just fix into for kind of lighting and other kind of services you might need to do. And that the fins also provide quite useful moments to tuck behind curtains and things like that. So all of the kind of the clutter that you might kind of traditionally get, you begin to use the kind of the structure itself to hide some of that and interface them together. Okay. So the building, obviously has a number of different kind of counselling rooms, all sorts of different kind of scales, from very kind of intimate kind of small spaces to kind of larger ones. So depending upon what kind of conversations and who might need to have them. And the doors are all kind of opening bolts. They're all pocket doors. So the whole centre can just open itself up, and you only really need to close the door if you want to have a kind of a private conversation. But there's no need to kind of be constantly opening and closing doors. So you don't get that kind of a clang of people moving through the centre. It's quite seamless, hopefully, as you kind of make your way through. Just going out through here. So back out onto the kind of the main mezzanine level, and with views out, and then out to the main kind of balcony area, which allows you to view back, as I said at the beginning of the kind of the concept idea, to look out over kind of Leeds, one of those few moments to kind of leave the hospital and look out back over to the city, and again just looking at some of the interface details of how the lighting etc. can be incorporated into the structure. So I'll just make my way kind of back downstairs to kind of look at one of the larger counselling rooms, which is kind of down here. And also, actually, I'll just go over and show you the kind of the back door. So as a studio, we're very interested as to those few moments when you actually touch a building. So whether that's pressing a lift button or opening a door handle or whatever it might be, those few moments when you might be kind of physically interacting with a building. And one of the things that we try and have in all our buildings really is trying to encourage people to touch. And so the idea that, for example, this here, that the handle itself, which is kind of a cast brass handle, which is actually one of the kind of the the branches of some of the trees that are kind of surrounding the project, which we managed to kind of pick up and then used as the formwork for the casting. That over time, the patina of that will change as kind of many hands kind of open those. So the idea that the building would kind of mellow and kind of settle into environment and create that kind of patina of use was kind of really important to us. But also that you felt like you could, and you had license to kind of touch the building, that the fins are quite soft, the lime plaster is quite soft, and you can kind of touch it. Even the concrete, which is essentially quite hard material, you really, the texture and the kind of the aggregates in it, you really want to kind of touch and kind of almost kind of stroke. So it was really about trying to create something that was very kind of tactile and encouraging that, rather than, as I say, a clinical environment, which is all about stopping people doing that and kind of and removing people from that tactility. And then I'll just move through. I mean, one of the challenges, which maybe Amanda will show, is that because of the site on multiple levels, it's really trying to make the best use of kind of spaces with those kind of multiple levels. And so I'll just go into the kind of the favorite place, which is the kind of the toilet. And it's about kind of using, even for some of the kind of the more kind of functional elements of the project, that has a tactility to it. So using kind of timber for some of the support handles for the toilets and things like that. But one of the key things is to kind of make the toilets a kind of a place to kind of be and stay, not something that you wanted to kind of immediately leave, because quite often they might be something where you might be taking just a moment of kind of reflection before you might want to go back out into the centre. So it's important that we kind of looked at those as their own little design project. And then moving through into one of the larger kind of counselling rooms. So this one has quite a very high floor to ceiling, and really kind of these high windows are almost at kind of street level. So you probably don't kind of see from this kind of view, but the ground, mostly this building is kind of sunk into the kind of the ground because of the steeply sloping site. But then using those high windows to draw that light down, and the shelving to try and bring the scale of the space kind of down. And you can see here, perhaps on the kind of imagery, that we used a kind of technique called kind of veil painting. So rather than just kind of painting the kind of the walls, there's a kind of technique where you actually, the colour dissipates as you go up the wall. So it's darker and richer at the lower level, and then it kind of gets lighter as you move up it. So it's a particular technique of painting that we've used on other kind of areas of the kind of the centre. So in a way, trying to bring that kind of that sense of kind of space down and give a richness to even the way in which the kind of the painting is done. And each of the rooms has its own slightly different kind of tone. So you feel like you're still exploring, even if you may have visited the centre kind of many times. So I'll just kind of move through back into the kind of the library space and just show some of the kind of the detail elements of here. So as you can imagine, there was quite a lot of complex interfaces of the building, where you have the stepping of the concrete, which is trying to mediate the stepping of the topography around it. And then you've got the interface of the kind of the glulam beams and the glulam kind of columns, really, with the overall kind of the glulam kind of fins, and you've got the kind of the glass interfaces as well. So it was a huge kind of a great amount of kind of workshops with both the kind of specialists who did the glass work, and also Bloom and Lehman as the kind of the main kind of supplier, if you like, of the overall kind of timber cassettes. And I think that the really interesting thing about this is that it was quite an accelerated kind of program to get us kind of on site once we got out the ground, and trying to deal with all those kind of complex interfaces was a kind of a real challenge on the project. But it was really through a lot of the kind of complex modelling and prototyping that hopefully a lot of the interfaces appear kind of thought through. And I'm sure people can find fault in that. I probably can as well. But it kind of slotted together as a kit. We were very pleased with how it kind of all came together. So I'm kind of conscious of time, and I don't know how. For me, it's quite a smooth journey. I'm sure to kind of people that are probably kind of factoring in, it might be a bit more kind of jilted. But perhaps if I just pause here briefly, you can see, as I mentioned before, how the fins really do a number of different jobs. They kind of support the structure. they support the kind of the gardens ahead, but also they kind of peel out and structurally support the staircase. So hopefully the project feels like it's really only a few components, but all working hard, kind of with each other. So I think Ben, I'm kind of conscious of time, so perhaps I'll kind of leave it there and kind of hand back to you, if that's okay.
Whatever time you need, Matt. It's I mean, where do you start? What a beautiful piece of architecture. I think we'd all agree with that. Yeah, absolutely blown away. Thank you very much for showing us around. So we've had one or two questions about the model and whether we can make that available after the event. The answer is yes. So it's, as I sort of said before, it's a Matterport model. So we commissioned Cloud9 to take the photography, and then that was all combined into the model that we've just been looking around. So we're going to be putting that on the website after the event, which is leedssocietyofarchitects.com, and the recording as well you'll be able to see in a few days' time as well. Yeah, absolutely stunning. Absolutely love it. We've got some great questions coming in, which we'll come to shortly. But if you do have any questions, anybody that's here, just use the Q&A function on the right-hand side. So now that we've actually seen inside the building, obviously a beautiful building itself, but that only goes so far. It needs to work for the people who are going to visit it and use it every day, which you'll see shortly. It does that, very much so. So we're going to go back to Amanda. We're going to hear about the impact the building has had on those who are actually inside that space, and in particular how things have been during the pandemic, because clearly the building was complete, and then there was a set of conditions that really were not expected by any of us. So Amanda's going to tell us a bit more. She's also going to give us details of how you can donate to Maggie's if you can, so that they can continue to carry out their really important work. So back to Amanda.
Oh, thank you. And I hope that gives you a really good insight into the beautiful place that I get to be in every single day. Just absolute, I get to get here really early in the morning, get the space to myself for a little while, get to feel it and breathe it and smell the wood and use the furniture and just be here. Matt described that the pathway down to the centre is as important as the centre itself, and for some people it might take a few attempts to walk down the path, walk back again, sit for a bit, have a bit of a breather, and then come into the centre. I'm currently sat at the kitchen table, and we've seen people make beautiful connections sat around this table, meeting other people who are going through something very similar to themselves. People eat here, they work here, so we've got people who might be having chemotherapy all day, radiotherapy every day for weeks on end, still want to do some work, still want to have life, and the centre helps them to do that. We've had people sleep during the day here. They're absolutely exhausted through treatment and just need somewhere to be quiet, to have some space and go to sleep. We've seen that. We can actually visibly see people relax as they walk through the door and leave feeling much better. It feels like we've been here forever, actually, and the staff at the hospital have said that too. The building itself has settled into its surroundings, and people have started to really think of us as part of their team as well. So I came into post in the July before we opened the doors in November, and so sort of the latter end of the building, built up a lovely relationship with our key contacts at Heatherwick's, the contractors, subcontractors, the hospital. So we've really started to build the community before we even opened the doors. And it's all right me saying how wonderful the space is and how well it flows, and how brilliant it is to be here and what we can see, but actually this is what people tell us they find, that it's safe, it's welcoming, it's holding, it's informative. People who get me get it, amazing and inspiring, tranquil with a home from home feel, which is exactly what was hoped to be achieved. Going away feeling stronger, an emotional release, and this is what real people with cancer and their families have told us. And this is probably my favourite quote from Tracy. This is Tracy and her family. You know, Maggie's is a bit like your favourite jumper or big fluffy blanket, offering warmth and comfort and just makes you feel safe. So exactly what was hoped to be achieved. As Ben mentioned, we had to adapt things. Everyone has, you know, the whole world has been in a very strange place in the last year. We opened the doors in November, and then by March we're just starting to build, and obviously then went into a national lockdown. We closed the doors for about 8 weeks and moved to virtual and telephone support, and supported the hospital with a cancer COVID helpline, because we knew that cancer treatments had been paused, delayed. We were seeing traumatic deaths and bereavement, so a real intensity into the support that we were offering. But actually, some of those support centres across the country are still closed. Their physical doors are closed. We actually opened back up within 8 weeks of lockdown and re-established, just come in May of last year. So we've been here since May last year, and the biggest reason was, you know, was the fact that we had enough space to do that, and the building and the environment supported us to do that. Even some of the other Maggies haven't been able to do that. They've had to move into an appointment world. You know, the whole world has moved into appointments. We didn't need to, and that's, you know, thanks to my great team, but also the building itself and the space that we had. And despite it being a really tricky year, we still had nearly 6,000 visits, and we still exceeded our target of 10% of the cancer population. And our benefits advisor, through a very difficult financial team for lots of people, but particularly for people with cancer, over £510,000 in financial support for people with cancer and their families. And you can see that our trends of engagement did decline through that lockdown, but then picked up quite rapidly. And because we've got that space to do that, we can allow people to come into the building and keep that informality and that homely feel, despite what's going on in the world. Matt talked about the different levels that we have in the building and the beauty of it, and I'll just give you one example that we know it can be a little bit challenging when we are thinking about where we put everything, but that's probably the only challenge that we've had. The building flows, it works really well. We've adapted to working in the open environment. It's been absolutely fantastic to work here. And I was just going to share with you Colton's story. Colton is a gentleman who we supported through the death of his wife, and this is his daughter, pictured here, Saffron. We know that 1 in 2 people will be affected by cancer, so that might mean that lots of you watching this today may well have been affected by cancer. So if there's anything that crops up in Colton's story, or anything that we've talked about, please do get in touch. We are here, and you can just come in or you can give us a call. But I'd just like to share Colton's story with you right now.
It was difficult to ask for help, but when I came in, and when I came into Maggie's, it was unbelievable. It just felt right. The minute I met her, I just felt like a kid, you know, goosebumps, and I knew straight away, you know, this is a person that I really love to marry and, you know, have children with. She just filled me with such happiness. I guess you try and live day by day, really, and you pray the days get longer. It's nearly a year to the day. She passed away on Mother's Day at home with us. I didn't know when I started to speak with Emma at the centre how much I needed that help, to be honest. Just felt like I was imploding, to be honest. I think it was just being overwhelmed with everything and just trying to cope, bringing up Saffron without Amanda there. And Saffron was 14 when Amanda passed away. You know, she's very, very close to her mum, and there's few things I think only a mother could get out of a child, but it was quite hard really to speak to Saf. Emma just put things in order that, you know, you're doing well and helping me through this trauma. Just gives me that confidence. I could take that outside and build that father-daughter relationship some more, not being afraid to ask certain things. I can't thank Maggie enough. I feel really great. You know, my father-daughter relationship is fantastic. There's a nice bond there. I'm really proud of her, and I know Amanda will be smiling up there. She'll be saying, "That's my girl."
So I think for me, it still gets to me when we see Colton in that video. We supported him for quite a while after bereavement, and we still keep in touch now. And he came back to the centre to help us make that video, and we're eternally grateful, because hopefully that will help other people to see that we're here for them. It also does help with our fundraising. So we are a charity. It costs around £2,400 to pay for a day at the centre, and around £600,000 for the year. And we don't have any statutory funding. That's all generosity of the public and our generous corporate partnerships, donations, memories, gifts in wills, Maggie's events, and sponsorships that we have. If anyone is interested in helping us, there's lots of ways you can do that. Monthly donation, we have a lottery, we have events which have been very challenging at the moment, so quite a lot of those have been online. Please do follow us on social media. You'll be able to get lots of ideas. We have a tribute page, a memory page, and anything that you might want to do, we're here to help with any ideas, any quirky fundraising activities you might want to do. And you can text on that number there, 70007, to donate and to help us to continue to do that. And just a really big thank you for the opportunity to share with you our amazing place, and hopefully you've got a snippet into what we do here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. It's hugely appreciated, and yeah, thank you for sharing that video. Obviously, as architects, we do what we do to create buildings that hopefully are the background to, you know, the real life stories that happen in them every day. So yeah, thank you to you guys for sharing it with us. So the donation details are up in the Q&A bar. If you missed them, just there in the presentation. We've been able to put the event on for most of you for free tonight. So if you can, please consider just giving a few pounds to support the charity. That's mine that I've donated just now. And yeah, it just allows Maggie to carry on doing the work that they do, which is really important to so many people. Okay, so we are going to finish off with a Q&A session, and we've got a lot of questions that have come in, and obviously if anybody else thinks of anything, please do pop it in. I can only apologise if we don't get through all of them. We have got a bit of time, and Matt and Amanda have done a phenomenal job of keeping to time, which is just great. But we'll just try and work through a couple now if we can. So there's a question about software. We've talked about that. That's Matterport is the company that allow us to put that model together. Yes, we'll share the link of the model after the event. There's just a comment here from Demi. This is the most amazing building I've ever seen. Thank you so much for sharing this experience. Even though it's virtual, the building is making me happy. Well, there you go. If we can do that just from some pixels on the screen, then everyone's done their job properly. There's a question here about accessibility, Matt, which I think you did touch on, and how have you found it, Amanda, in terms of getting people up and down different levels?
Yeah, we do have a lift, so that everyone can get to every level in the centre. I suppose a little bit of the challenge is the slope that we have. I'm sat in the kitchen and there is a slope down to the front of the building, but we found a way around that. We just go into the car park and we go down to level B2 and we come round the front. So we find a way. As Matt showed, we have got accessible toilets. So that we haven't had any problems with accessibility. Everyone's been able to get into the centre. What we sometimes find is that people are very anxious the first time that they come in. So rather than any physical accessibility issues, it could be anxiety. So actually, we've got a really great relationship with the hospital staff, and sometimes they walk across with people, and you know, the biggest ambassadors that we have are the staff at the hospital, and you know, we've had lots of staff come and join us here because actually it's a sanctuary for them as well.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Okay, there's a couple of questions here about the, you know, obviously this is a timber building, and there's a couple of questions. Somebody's asking if we can expand on the sort of sustainable features. This is sort of actually a bit more broadly on how the building is sustainable in its measures. But there's also, I think, a question relating to the timber, and you know, we know about the sort of potential that it has in terms of sustainability to improve or reduce carbon emissions, etc. But one thing that comes up time and time again is fire, and you know, clearly, you know, we know that there is a way to address that. So is that something, Matt, you want to just touch on? Sort of two questions there, maybe at once.
Okay, so Ben, so firstly about the kind of sustainability, the use of timber.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think when we were first looking at the project, the biggest driver for us was about making something that was potential to be prefabricated, and that was driven by a lot to do with the site, access to the site, and it was a very difficult kind of site to kind of gain access to and to have. And so when we looked at something to be prefabricated, then naturally we started thinking about kind of timber as a material to use, and about how we could then use it in as many different ways as kind of possible to as our main kind of building material. In terms of the kind of the sector of kind of Bloom and Lehman, one of the things that drew us to them as a timber manufacturing company is the fact that they do kind of use kind of locally sourced and their own kind of forestry, and they use the waste heat from the production of their timber cassettes, etc., to in effect to power their own factory. So we were quite drawn to that as a kind of methodology. Now, in terms of the kind of the overall embodied carbon of each of the kind of trees that would be grown to then produce the timber, there's the studio did a series of different calculations concerning that. It's a kind of but I'm slightly reticent about saying, you know, that one thin panel sequesters 7 kilograms of carbon, but you know, I think really about some of that you can kind of lose yourself in the kind of in that. But I think the use of kind of timber as a natural kind of material and the prefabrication components, you know, we felt were kind of really important from a human perspective in terms of touching a building, but also from a sustainability perspective and minimizing our embodied carbon. But we are very conscious that the groundworks, the concrete that's in the groundworks, there wasn't any kind of practical way in which we could create that ground slab. So we had to use concrete there, but anywhere where we could use kind of a timber and kind of renewable materials, we tried to as much as possible. Some of the main kind of conversations we had by such extensive use of timber was concerning kind of fire and kind of longevity in terms of how that timber would kind of weather. Because one of the things we were really keen on is trying to blur the inside and outside of the building together. So obviously, you know, the same timber fins is inside the building as it is outside the building, where it's against much more kind of exposure. I mean, Leeds, Amanda, not the sunniest place in the kind of the world. It can be quite kind of wet and windy. And how do you kind of think about the weathering of the timber? So, in fact, we've been very surprised as we kind of monitored the weathering of the timber, that all kind of timber kind of grays over time. And what we did was we put in a certain kind of light wash treatment to the timber, which kind of pre-aged it. So it actually began all the timber is slightly grey, which meant that as it kind of weathers over time, there isn't that kind of jarring discoloration between one and the other. And then actually, as we visited the building over time, the roof, which cantilever out over and protect the timber, are actually performing a pretty good job of protecting the fins on the outside from kind of weathering. So that's been quite interesting to see their performance over time. And we've been actually slightly surprised by how well it looks, even though it's been open for a considerable series in a couple of winters. It's still looking really good. So we'll be monitoring that ongoing. But that's been a pleasant surprise, because we were nervous about that. Then kind of in terms of kind of fire, because the building from a kind of fire escape perspective is actually it's actually extremely good, because you can leave the building in multiple kind of points. There isn't very long travel distances, and because of the nature of how the building's nestled into the site, and so actually the kind of the fire regulations were relatively straightforward to get past, even though the building is principally made up of kind of timber.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. OK, there's a question here. It looks amazing. Well done to everybody involved. Courageous client and team. I think I'd agree with that. Are you able to sort of briefly share any cost information about the project? Obviously, it's a one-off this, but yeah, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, cost is always, everyone's always fascinated about cost. I think it's interesting when you think about, do you include the furniture and which aspects go in? Is it got, all of that? So the building was around kind of 4.6 million. As a kind of a cost, but when you have kind of furniture and other things, that kind of additions to that. I mean, one of the interesting things about this project for us, that a lot of the cost is actually in the ground. Well over £1 million to kind of get out of the ground because of the nature of the site. And there is it's not particularly sexy, but there is a petrol interceptor on the site itself, which is led from the car park, which you have to do certain things. You can't put foundations around that, and there's a lot of spoil and contamination on the site that had to be cleaned up. So all of those things obviously affect the cost. But I think we were very pleased with the building, and I guess it's kind of it's a question for Amanda as to whether she thought it was worth it.
Yeah, and that's exactly what questions we get as a charity, the amount that we spent, but we're very open with our donors about why we're spending that money and what it's for. And actually, we want a really, really special place where people feel absolutely valued when it's probably the worst time in their lives. So I think it's pretty priceless.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, both of you. OK, there's a great comment here from Paul. Thank you. This scheme is a triumph of architecture meets landscape architecture. There are actually a couple of questions I'm going to link together here, which are about the sort of external and internal planting. So how early did you engage a landscape architect? I'm guessing pretty early. And there's also there's a lot of interest in the roof build-up. We've talked about worms a little bit, but it just, I guess, brought just kind of how that generally works, Matt. And then there's another question which is about how are the interior plants looked after? And actually there are plants dotted up and down the place, aren't there? So that's probably one for Amanda. So I'll just kind of throw that to both of you, if that's okay.
Okay, I mean, maybe I'll talk a little bit about the kind of the landscape kind of journey first. So we worked with a company called Bolster Nagus, who are we have our own landscape architects in the studio because we use a lot of landscape as part of our work. So we do a lot of that ourselves, but particularly in terms of kind of some of the kind of technical drainage detailing, in terms of the kind of plant selection, we usually work with kind of landscape architects. And so we kind of entered into a collaboration with them, and it was a kind of a fascinating journey we went on together, because what we're trying to do is create a feeling that the building is kind of nestled into the ground, whereas some of the ground is raised up kind of 14 meters, and some of it's actually sitting on earth. But trying to kind of blur your understanding about what's sitting where was quite a challenge, kind of structurally and technically. But we were always really clear in terms of what we felt the landscape should do, that it would, in effect, it should be kind of a British woodland. So the idea about it being kind of native species that had kind of, it wasn't a manicured kind of garden as such, it was something kind of wilder. And it's something that, you know, the kind of Maggie was quite interested in herself as a gardener, was really about giving the sense that it was unfinished. And what I mean by that is that when you go to the centre, and there are, I don't know whether there still are, Amanda, we certainly left a lot of kind of gardening tools and things like that. So that the sense that actually, as you would use the centre, you would actually become part of the landscape team, and you could go out and kind of dig and plant and do things in the garden. It wasn't just something manicured to look at. It should feel quite naturalistic and would develop over time. So that was something that we felt as a kind of a driver, and it's got kind of, you know, around about kind of, I think 20,000 different kind of plants in it, with, you know, including huge kind of diversity of kind of plants. So it's actually a very kind of vibrant kind of habitat, if you like, right in the middle of the hospital, which was really important for us and for the landscape designers as well. And then I guess some of the main kind of, I alluded to a little bit, was about worms. So the kind of the eternal challenge about, were the roofs, I mean, it would have been kind of lighter and easier to make it more, the roofs more of a kind of a sedum roof. But actually we were really interested in actually the roofs being kind of proper soil. So we could put in kind of the kind of planting and trees that were reflecting of a kind of a British woodland. And really it was a team between ourselves, the structural engineers at AKT, and the landscape architect to see where could we put the weight. Where could the load of the soil go, because you have to measure the soil when it's kind of full of water. So how would you then kind of best kind of accommodate that? So rather than the structure in effect defining, you know, in effect where we wanted the soil to then change the structure in a way, it, you know, allowed us to kind of put soil where we could. So in effect we scalloped the soil on the kind of the finer element analysis of the structure. So the soil is actually heaped up in areas where the structure is most deep, and because of other technical reasons, because of the groundworks and the levels and things. And then where it wasn't, that was where the soil actually thins out. You don't really pick that up in it, and the whole soil is kind of the whole landscape is mounded. So at the very edge, I think it drops to around about maybe no more than 200 mil, maybe less. I can't quite recall. At the very edge. So where some of the kind of smaller shrubs and droopers, if you like, the ones that kind of tangle over the edge of the kind of the pots are located, and then it steps up into the trees and bushes and shrubs as you go further back, and the soil gets deeper as your eye moves away to the centre of the pot, where the cassettes are and where the structure is most robust. So in a way, it was an iterative process. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't like I need a metre of soil everywhere, please create the structure to do that. It was more a case of the structural performance really started to dictate where the soil depths were available, and then even the positioning of the trees and the root balls around services and access hatches and things like that. So it was a coordination kind of journey. And also, I mean, one of the main challenges, I think, you know, for me, the thing that caused the most kind of challenge on the project was really creating principally a prefabricated timber structure that would then hold a great many tons of earth and water. And in effect, you know, rather than a kind of a concrete structure with a concrete slab, which you would ordinarily think about as a kind of the main frame that would hold something big and heavy, it was actually using something that was actually inherently light. So we worked a lot with AKT on the kind of the modelling of that to make sure that that would work, and in terms of how we would kind of deal with the structural kind of challenges of doing that. And then interior planting, I think Amanda might need to speak to about watering of those and the kind of maintenance of those.
I think I could see one just over your right or left shoulder, Amanda. Yeah, just kind of up there. Is everything kind of accessible from?
Yeah. So I've got some step ladders that I reach the plants with. So they are my responsibility. The whole centre is my responsibility. So as a nurse, I worked in a huge NHS teaching hospital where we had an estates and facilities team. That's me now, with some help from from contracts that we've put in place. So it is very much a home. You know, you call out a plumber, you call out whatever you need. If the toilet's blocked, we deal with it. You know, and the plants were included in that. And I'll be really honest, I have one cactus at home. and I've had to learn how to look after very beautiful. They seem to just really like this environment. We've propagated new ones. So the one where I'm sorry, I've had to move because I've had to plug my laptop in. But where I was sat at the kitchen table, the one behind me is a newbie, and we've got little babies scattered around the centre at the minute that are growing and rooting, and I cannot take credit for that at all. I found a volunteer called Nikki who is with us every Tuesday, and I don't touch anything in between, and she sorts everything out on a Tuesday and tells me to keep away from everything. But yeah, we've propagated new ones. We've got an open garden scheme coming up in a few weeks where we're going to probably do a sneaky fundraiser and sell some of those babies. They're doing very well. No fatalities so far.
Delighted to hear it. Thank you. Okay, there's a couple of questions again that I'm going to sort of roll together if I can, and it's to do with you know, the Heatherwick team have worked really hard to create a space that has a feeling that you're comfortable, and that, you know, there is you know, there are obvious connections in terms of the kind of healing process, and I guess that's psychological, and how that relates to, you know, perhaps people might, you know, even physically heal. So the question really is about sort of how you might go about monitoring that. I guess really the answer that at this stage all you can say, Amanda, is that, you know, the feedback from the people that spend time in the building is kind of gives you all you need to know in that respect, I guess.
Yeah, we do an impact report every year, so we collect some data, but we're very careful not to be intrusive with data, because that's the whole point of the environment, is that we don't do that. So we don't keep people's address and postcode and telephone number. We ask them to come to us when it feels right for them. So we keep very limited data, which was a challenge through a pandemic when we had to shut the door and then we didn't know where anybody was or how to contact them, and we had to really reach out in a different way. But we do an annual impact report. We've just received the results of that. So we do an audit every year where we ask people how they feel in the building. Has it had an impact on their lifestyle, their ability to cope with things, their ability to have a more in-depth conversation with their medical team. So we kind of ask key questions, but we just do that once a year and do a snapshot of people in the centre. So we've done our first one, and the results were really positive, well, amazing and really positive. But I think that the main things that we tend to do are our stories. So you saw Colton's story, and we ask people to share their stories, because that's what we want to achieve, the meaning in what's happening for them.
Amazing, thank you. And just following on from that quickly, in terms of the pandemic and how that's been, and obviously you've talked a bit about this already, do you think the Maggie's brief actually for future centres might change in light of kind of, you know, your experiences? I mean, I guess from your side of things, as you said, you've been able to continue really quite successfully. Maybe there are lessons learned from the successes of Leeds that might apply to other centres. Is that fair?
Yeah, we've already had I've been approached by other charities, other organisations, to ask how they can reopen, how they can do that safely, and get some advice from us around, you know, as much as we, you know, there's still risk assessments to do, there's still health and safety things to do that we do very much in the background, that we did very quickly. I think what we've learned is that we've probably linked, from a positive point of the pandemic, we've probably linked better as Maggie's, that, you know, because we've had to move to a virtual world. If somebody's running quite a bespoke group in Cambridge, people in Leeds have now been able to join that. If we've been running a successful end of treatment course, which we have, other people from other parts of the country have been able to join that. We have got a bit of more of a hybrid approach to things, because we know that you know, people are travelling from across the country to get into Leeds for their treatment, and maybe coming back to us for a course or a support group might be tricky. So we're actually setting up a hybrid approach with a Zoom and a projector and us, and trying to think about what we learn from this. I don't think the brief itself and the vision of the Just Come In will ever change, because actually it's the whole package of the environment and the support, but we get that we wouldn't want people to miss out. So we have learned through that, definitely. Definitely had to change what we were doing, but yeah, we were very fortunate that as an organisation and as a team, I guess that has been a big thing. As a team, we felt safe to be back at work. Was there any other bit of that question? Have I missed?
No, that's absolutely answered it perfectly. Thank you. And I think we'll probably leave it there. I'm conscious of everybody's time. We've got 3 minutes left. I'm reliably told it won't just boot us out at the stroke of 6:30. But I think we should I think we should leave it there. So thank you. There's just a couple of things from me then before we wrap up, if that's okay. So as I've said a couple of times, the Matterport model will be available online soon. That'll be up on our website, leedssocietyofarchitects.com. You'll be able to explore that at your own pace. And the live event, the recording of today's event, that'll be on the RIBA's YouTube channel pretty soon as well. If you would like to go and see the building in person, and there may be one or two of you off the back of this that would like to do that, we'd be really grateful if you could contact the centre in advance. That would be really great, just to arrange a date and time that works for everybody. There is, I think, a link as well to a feedback form, which I think is somewhere in the Q&A bar. If it's not there, then we'll be emailing it on afterwards. It's just a bit of a chance for us to find out how you've found it today. You know, obviously, just any comments, let us know so we can continue to make events like this. I mean, just sort of from my point of view, you know, the pandemic originally felt like a lot of doors were closing on you know the types of events that we could run, because normally as the LSA we put lots of people in a room together, which clearly we can't do at the moment. But actually, you know, we've had hundreds of people today sort of sharing an audience with you know, with Matt, who's joining us from London, from Amanda, who's actually live inside the building, and you know, we're sort of all able to go on that journey together. Actually, if we were doing that in sort of small groups of kind of 5 or 10, it would take us a very long time to get through all that. So actually, you know, it's a format that originally was sort of dealing with constraints, but actually it's working really well for us. So, you know, I really hope we can do more of these in the future. There are other questions that weren't picked up on. There were some sort of quite specific questions. If you have got anything like that, then what I'd suggest is go to leedssocietyofarchitects.com, get in touch. You'll be able to send an email to me, and we can, you know, hopefully help you out from there if there's something more specific that you'd like to ask, if that's okay. And a couple of other things. There are some other RIBA events. If you enjoyed today, then please feel free to join in with other RIBA events as well. There's an upcoming Global Small Talks event, which is a brilliant series by the RIBA, where, you know, in a similar format to this, we're bringing people not just from around the country but across the world together to talk about different issues and different projects. There's also a tour of the Lehman Building at Newcastle Helix, and there's also a Sheffield virtual building visit of Sky House, and just come up on the bottom there is the feedback form as well. Excellent. Seriously, you know, good or bad, just let us know how you feel about things, and we can take it forward then. Fine, I will stop prattling on. So a final massive thank you to everybody involved. As always, these things are a huge team effort. We're hopefully actually, you know, thinking ahead now to what we can do next in this series, which is brilliant. But thank you so much to the LSA team. Thanks to RIBA Yorkshire, Faye, who you've not seen today, but has done an amazing job in sort of moving the camera around to everybody at different times. Thanks to Ibstock for supporting us with sponsorship. Thanks to Cloud9. A huge thank you to Matt and the Heatherwick team, not just for all your work in the building, but for showing us around today. And that includes Jess, who's watching online, I think, at the moment, who's been a big help in getting all of this set up. And of course, Amanda and the wonderful team at Maggie's. I think that's everybody. If you'd like to find out more about the Leeds Society of Architects, please go to leedssocietyofarchitects.com, follow us on social media, join the mailing list, get involved, all of that stuff. Okay, so thank you very much, and yeah, hope to see you all again. So yeah, cheers guys, and enjoy the rest of your evenings. Take care.
Thanks, Ben.
Cheers.
Thank you.